Please don't hurt me. I can't walk. The woman's voice trembled through the damp, narrow alley, sharp with desperation and fear. Rainwater glistened on the cracked pavement, pooling beneath her trembling body. A car's headlights flared behind the figure approaching her, casting his long shadow across the walls like a looming monster. The man's pace was slow, deliberate. His fist clenched, his breath heavy in the night air. Rebecca Morgan curled up tighter. Her white designer suit smeared with dirt and tears, blonde hair clinging to her face. Her left ankle was badly swollen, twisted at an unnatural angle. She winced, trying to move, but the pain sent fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. At that moment, around the corner, at the end of the alley, a man appeared. Tall, rugged, carrying a little girl wrapped in a faded yellow raincoat. His clothes were worn, his boots wet, his expression tired from a long day's work. But when he heard the voice so raw, so broken, Jack Taylor stopped. The little girl stirred in his arms. "Daddy, is she going to die?" Sophie whispered, her small voice carrying in the quiet night. Jack set her gently on the ground. "Stay here," he said softly but firmly. She nodded, clutching a small stuffed rabbit to her chest, raindrops glistening on its worn fabric ears. Without hesitation, Jack stepped forward into the alley. His voice rang out low and commanding. "Step away from her now." The man looming over Rebecca turned startled for a moment. Tension rippled in the rain-soaked air. The stranger's eyes, sharp, steady, unflinching, locked on the aggressor. There was something in that gaze that made the would-be attacker pause. Not fear, not rage, just quiet certainty. The certainty of a man who had faced down flames and death and wasn't about to back down now. The would-be attacker took a step back, then another. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows. Rebecca blinked in disbelief, her breath catching, as Jack approached. Her limbs trembled not just from pain, but from shock. The little girl peeked from the alley's entrance, her eyes wide. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled across the night sky. Jack knelt beside Rebecca, his voice soft now. "You're safe. I've got you." She stared at him, lips parted, unable to speak. Rain continued to fall, washing away the makeup from her face, revealing vulnerability she'd spent years hiding. She didn't yet know his name. But in that moment, something changed. And though she could not stand, though she was broken and bruised for the first time in years, she had been seen. Not as the CEO of Morgan Innovations, not as a business titan worth millions, but simply as a woman in need. And her life was about to change forever. Jack Taylor lived on the third floor of a crumbling apartment building where the walls whispered with the echoes of lives long exhausted. At 37, his life had already been split in two. Before and after he lost his wife. 2 years ago, cancer had taken Jessica, quickly, cruelly, leaving nothing but memories and medical bills. Since then, everything revolved around Sophie. He worked as a washing machine repairman, taking jobs that paid just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Most days he smelled like rusted pipes and laundry detergent, but he never minded. As long as Sophie had crayons, warm meals, and a safe place to sleep, he could live with the aching joints and late rent notices that piled up by the door. Once Jack had worn a different uniform. He was a rescue worker, a firefighter paramedic with nerves of steel, and a heart trained to run toward danger when everyone else fled. There was a long scar on his left arm, a souvenir from a burning house where he tried to pull a small girl out of the flames. He never talked about it. Some memories weren't meant to be honored. They were meant to be carried quietly like stones in your pocket, weighing you down but keeping you grounded. Now he carried his daughter, Sophie, 6 years old, with wild curls and a giggle that could shake the sadness out of a room. She never went anywhere without her battered box of crayons. "Colors make things better," she liked to say, with the simple wisdom children sometimes possess. She filled their home with drawings, flowers, rainbows, stick figures, holding hands. Her world was tiny but bright, filling the cracks in Jack's broken heart. That rainy night, Jack had promised her a treat, a hot dog from the corner stand, if she behaved through the grocery run. They had just turned down a back alley to cut across the block when they heard it. A scream, a woman's voice trembling, pleading. Jack didn't hesitate. Some instincts never fade, no matter how much you try to bury them under the weight of everyday survival. As Jack carried the injured stranger up the stairs to his apartment, he felt Sophie's curious eyes on him. He hadn't brought anyone home since Jessica died. The apartment felt different, with another presence inside it, like air pressure changing before a storm. Sophie watched from the doorway as he gently laid Rebecca on their worn couch. "Daddy, Why is she crying like me when I miss mommy? The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating. She's had a hard day, honey, Jack answered softly, smoothing Sophie's damp curls. Sometimes grown-ups cry too. This simple truth seemed to satisfy her. Sophie nodded solemnly, then wandered off toward her room, her little boots squeaking with each step. Jack brought a clean towel and wrapped it gently around Rebecca's shoulders. I'll get you something warm. Tea, okay. She nodded mutely, still clutching the laptop against her chest like a shield. Rebecca leaned back into the cushions, still damp, still cold. Her ankle throbbed with each heartbeat. She took in the apartment with a glance, the mismatched furniture, the crayon drawings covering the refrigerator, the single photo of a laughing woman with Sophie's eyes. This place was so far removed from her penthouse with its minimalist design and city views that it might as well have been another planet. Yet something about the clutter, the evidence of life actually lived, made her chest ache with an emptiness she hadn't realized was there. Rebecca Morgan had not intended to run. She was not a runner. She was a fighter. But when her fiancé, James Wilson, the CFO of her company, locked the hotel suite door behind them and began raising his voice, something inside her snapped. For months, he had been pressuring her to sign over the control of critical assets in their joint holdings. The marriage was part of a business strategy, her father's strategy to secure dominance in the tech world. But Rebecca was not built for cages, no matter how gilded. She said no. And when his hand gripped her wrist, with bruising force, she grabbed the laptop with the incriminating files and fled barefoot into the rain. She had never run like that before. Not through alleys, not with her heart pounding like a hunted animal's. She slipped on the wet concrete, her ankle giving way beneath her with a sickening pop. She fell hard, still clutching the laptop against her chest, as if it were her only lifeline. Because it was now. Her breath came in gasps. The pain in her leg blurred her vision. Her white designer suit was ruined, torn at the shoulder, soaked to the bone. Her phone had been lost somewhere on the street, and the man she once trusted was getting closer. She could hear his footsteps. That was when she saw him, Jack silhouetted against the alley entrance, a stranger who stepped into the darkness when everyone else would have walked away. In the middle of the night, Rebecca woke with a start. The room was dark except for a soft glow from the hallway. Her ankle pulsed with pain, but it was manageable now, wrapped tightly in a makeshift bandage. Quiet filled the apartment, no sirens, no footsteps behind her, no one shouting. She sat up, unsure of how long she'd slept. The blanket that had covered her had slipped to the floor. Her laptop, still clutched in sleep, rested by her side. Guilt pressed on her chest. She had barged into a stranger's life, disrupted everything. She had no right. No place here among crayon drawings and photos of a happy family. She was a liability, a danger. James would be looking for her. She couldn't risk bringing that darkness to this door. Slowly, Rebecca rose, biting back a hiss as her foot touched the ground. She limped toward the door, hoping to leave before dawn. No notes, no thanks, just disappear back into her own complicated world. But as she reached for her shoes by the door, she stopped. They weren't wet anymore. They had been carefully dried and patched. The loose sole had been stitched up with clean, deliberate lines. Next to them was a folded towel, fresh and warm. On top of it, a small piece of paper. The handwriting was rough but steady. Your foot's not better yet. You can stay. It's okay. Rebecca stared at it for a long moment. No conditions, no expectations, no price tag, just kindness. She sank slowly to the floor, the paper trembling in her hand. All her life she had fought to prove herself to be good enough, sharp enough, strong enough. But here in a tiny apartment, with a broken floorboard near the sink and crayon drawings on every wall, she felt something she never had in her glass-towered world, accepted for nothing more than simply being. The first morning after Rebecca woke to the faint whistle of a kettle and the soft clatter of pans from the small kitchen. For a moment, she thought she was still in her penthouse with staff preparing breakfast according to schedule. But then she saw the modest couch beneath her, the worn curtains fluttering from a draft, and the drawings taped across the refrigerator. She was not in her world anymore. Jack appeared carrying a steaming mug. He placed it on the small table beside her. The sharp scent of ginger filled the air. Drink this, he said, his voice calm. It'll help with the pain. She sat up slowly, testing her injured ankle. It still throbbed, but the swelling seemed less than the night before. She sipped the tea. It was spicy, strong, oddly comforting. You made this yourself? She asked, almost surprised. Old habit, he replied, sitting down on the edge of the coffee table with a roll of bandages. Ginger tea, clean water, steady hands. That's all it takes sometimes. Without another word, he gently lifted her foot onto his lap. His touch was steady but careful, never lingering, never invasive. He removed the old bandage, cleaned the wound, and began to rewrap it. Rebecca watched in silence. She had been surrounded by assistants and advisors for years, but none of them had ever cared for her like this. Not with patience, not with attention, not without expectation. "You've done this before," she murmured. He nodded once. "Rescue work fires accidents. You learn to keep calm even when you're falling apart inside." Her eyes softened. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, he reached for her jacket. Torn from the struggle in the alley, he pulled a small sewing kit from the shelf and began threading a needle. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," he interrupted gently, "but it's worth fixing." The thread was a little uneven, the stitches imperfect. Still, he worked with such focus that something in Rebecca's chest broke open. The tears came suddenly, unstoppable. She covered her face with her hands, ashamed of this weakness. Jack paused. "Did I hurt you?" She shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, I'm not used to this, being cared for." He didn't push her to explain. He simply handed her a tissue and said, "Everyone deserves it, even you." That was when small footsteps pattered across the floor. Sophie appeared, her hair in wild curls, her pajamas covered with stars. She held a piece of paper tightly against her chest. Without hesitation, she walked over and placed it in Rebecca's lap. "This is for you," Sophie said proudly. Rebecca unfolded the paper. It was a crayon drawing, bright colors filling the page. A tall man with brown hair, a little girl in yellow shoes, and beside them, an empty outline of a woman with golden hair. Confused, Rebecca looked up. "Who is this?" Sophie smiled, pointing at the figure. "That's you. I left the space empty for a long time, waiting for someone who belongs. I think it's supposed to be you now." Rebecca's throat tightened. Her hands shook as she held the picture. "Sweetheart," she whispered, struggling to find words. "Why me?" "Because you're here," Sophie answered simply. "And you look like someone who needs a family." Rebecca let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She pressed the picture to her chest as tears spilled freely. For so long, her life had been a battlefield of boardrooms, contracts, and expectations. She had been defined by numbers, power, and appearances. No one had ever left a space for her, only demands for what she must become. Yet here in this cramped apartment, with peeling paint and the sound of a child's crayons scratching across paper, she was being offered something she had never known a place. She looked at Jack, who stood silently in the doorway watching the exchange. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes told her everything. Acceptance, patience, and a quiet hope that neither of them dared name out loud. Rebecca turned back to Sophie, managing a smile through her tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's the kindest gift I've ever been given." Sophie giggled and picked up her crayon box. "Then I'll make it official." "Purple dress, right?" Rebecca nodded, laughing softly through her tears. "Yes, make it purple." And as Sophie filled in the empty outline with bold strokes of color, Rebecca felt something loosen inside her. Something soft. Something alive. For the first time in years, she felt what it meant to belong. As days passed, Rebecca's ankle began to heal slowly. Each morning brought a little more strength, a little less pain. But walking was still difficult. She hated the feeling of weakness, of needing help. But Jack never made her feel small for it. He offered his arm without a word, let her lean on him as they moved through the apartment. When she stumbled, he steadied her. When she winced, he paused. There was no pity in his actions, just presence and patience. Just one step at a time, he'd say gently, his voice low and calm. Rebecca would nod, focusing on the rhythm of their movement. Step, breathe, balance. It became their quiet ritual, a rhythm of trust that neither of them named out loud. In these moments, with his arms supporting her, Rebecca felt the walls she'd built around herself begin to crack. Not crumbling all at once, but slowly, like ice thawing under the first tentative warmth of spring. One sunny Saturday morning, Sophie announced it was time to make pancakes. "Daddy makes them okay," she said with an exaggerated shrug that made Jack's eyes crinkle with amusement. "But I bet Rebecca makes them fancy." "I wouldn't count on it," Rebecca warned with a smirk. "I've never actually cooked anything myself." Sophie's eyes widened with disbelief. Never. Not even toast. Rebecca shook her head, feeling suddenly self-conscious under the child's incredulous stare. Nope, not even toast. Jack raised an eyebrow, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. That's about to change. They gathered in the small kitchen, elbows bumping, as they mixed batter in a cracked ceramic bowl. Sophie stood on a chair to reach the counter, her curls bouncing with excitement as she gave orders like a seasoned chef. More milk. Not too many eggs. And wait for the bubbles before flipping. Rebecca tried to follow the directions, but the first pancake stuck to the pan, a gummy mess that refused to take shape. The second one folded in on itself when she tried to flip it too early. The third one somehow caught fire, a small blue flame leaping up from the pan. Jack snatched it off the burner, waving a dish towel at the thin trail of smoke. I think that one's yours, he joked, nudging the blackened blob toward Rebecca's plate. Their eyes met over the smoking ruin of breakfast, and suddenly they were all laughing, real laughter that came from the belly, loud and unguarded. It filled the kitchen like sunlight. When they finally sat down to eat, the pancakes were uneven, a little burnt, some even raw in the middle. But Sophie grinned as she took a big bite. These are Dorky pancakes, she declared with authority. But Dorky is good. They ate slowly, letting the golden light pour over the table. Outside the window, the city bustled on, but inside time seemed to soften. Sophie chattered about school, how she'd almost won the spelling bee, how her teacher wore socks with cats on them, how she'd told the class that Rebecca was her maybe new mom. Rebecca froze for half a second, eyes meeting Jack's across the table. He didn't react, just reached over and poured more syrup onto Sophie's plate like it was the most natural thing in the world. But later, when Sophie had gone to play with the neighbor's kids under the watchful eye of Mrs. Gonzalez from across the hall, Jack turned to Rebecca. I'm sorry about what she said. Kids don't filter. Rebecca washed another plate, focusing on the soap bubbles rather than the tumult of emotions his words triggered. It's okay. I'm flattered, actually, just as long as you know there's no expectation. We're just glad to help, Rebecca nodded, passing him a wet plate. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment neither of them moved. The small kitchen felt even smaller, suddenly charged with something neither was ready to name. I should check on my situation soon, Rebecca said, finally, breaking the moment. I can't hide forever. Jack's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his features. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. Whatever you need. Just know you've got a place here as long as you want it. That evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep surrounded by coloring books and plush animals, Rebecca and Jack sat on the couch watching the soft flicker of headlights from the street below. The television was off. The quiet between them was full, not empty. Rebecca pulled the blanket closer, her body still tired from practicing steps earlier. Without thinking, she leaned sideways and rested her head on Jack's shoulder. He didn't move. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, the warmth of his presence grounding her. You don't know, she whispered, but you've saved me from so many things. Her voice was barely more than breath, but he heard her. He didn't turn, didn't ask what she meant. He simply said, I didn't save anyone. I just saw someone who needed help. She closed her eyes. That answer, quiet, honest, unheroic, cut through all the noise she'd lived with for years. No one had ever looked at her and seen a person before. They'd seen opportunity, strategy, success. But Jack had seen someone who was hurting, and instead of walking away, he'd stayed. And that, she realized, was what love might actually be. Not grand gestures, but the willingness to stand still with someone until they could walk again. But peace never lasts. It began with a phone ringing in the hallway, then the buzzing at the front door, then the knock. Loud, firm, too familiar. Rebecca froze, her hands still soapy from washing dishes. Jack glanced out the window, then quickly closed the curtain. Don't move, he said calmly. She didn't need to ask why. The moment she saw the sleek black car parked on the street, she knew they had found her. Within hours, more arrived. A cameraman, a woman in a tight blazer with a microphone, a man from legal wearing a tie that screamed damage control. The sidewalk outside the apartment became a low-key spectacle. Jack stood by the door, arms folded across his chest, body blocking the peephole. From the bedroom, Sophie's voice called out softly. Why are people outside? It's okay, honey, Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. They're just lost. But they weren't lost. They were hunters, and she was the prey. Later that evening, as the reporters grew tired and the knocks faded into silence, Rebecca received a message on the burner phone Jack had bought her. An offer from the board, a generous one. Millions in new compensation, full reinstatement, rebranding, reputation management. All she had to do was come back, sign the papers, smile for the cameras, and pretend none of it had happened. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she closed the phone and walked into the kitchen where Jack stood drying a dish with an old checkered towel. "I'm not going back," she said. He didn't look up right away. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "I've been offered more money than I could ever spend. But not once in all those years did I wake up feeling like I do here." He turned to her, eyes serious. "How do you feel here?" She hesitated, then answered, "Real, seen, safe." He nodded once. That was all he needed to hear. By morning, they had packed a bag. Jack loaded Sophie into the truck and drove them out of the city down winding roads lined with trees that had just begun to turn gold with the coming fall. They arrived at a quiet farmhouse tucked behind a grove of birch trees. It belonged to Jack's mother, a retired nurse with soft gray hair and hands that knew how to make anyone feel like a child again. She took one look at Rebecca, didn't ask questions, and said, "There's warm bread in the oven and a clean bed upstairs. Rest now. Questions later." That night, under a sky full of stars and silence, Rebecca and Jack sat on the porch steps, a worn quilt draped over their knees. "I used to think I had everything," she said. "Titles, property, power." He said nothing, just waited. And yet she continued, it was all hollow. "I didn't realize how much I had given up just to be seen as successful." Jack took a slow sip of tea, then spoke. "They only saw your name, not you," she nodded. "Exactly." He looked out across the field, voice quiet. "I know what that's like, to be seen as something you're not." She turned to him. "Tell me." He took a long breath. "There was a fire. Years ago, small house, family trapped inside. I was the first on the scene. Pulled out the parents, the older child. But the little girl," he stopped, his voice catching. He didn't need to finish. She could hear the rest in his silence. She reached for his hand. "You still carry it, don't you?" He nodded. "Every day." She understood then why he had stepped into that alley, why he had brought her home. The weight he carried wasn't just grief, it was the need to save, to make up for what he couldn't change. There was no need to say more. The silence between them was not heavy, it was shared, honored. She didn't fill it with apologies. He didn't fill it with bravado. They simply sat there, their fingers intertwined under the night sky. Two people who had each lost something and now quietly had begun to find something else. They didn't speak of love or promises, but when Jack glanced at her and she met his eyes without flinching, they both understood. They were waiting for each other, and neither of them was waiting alone anymore. As days turned into weeks at the farmhouse, Rebecca began to feel strength returning, not just to her ankle, but to her spirit. Jack's mother, Ellen, treated her like family without question. She taught Rebecca how to knead bread, how to hang laundry so it caught the scent of sunshine, how to plant bulbs that would sleep through winter and burst into color in spring. Sophie trailed after them both, collecting smooth stones and bird feathers, arranging them in careful patterns on the porch railing. In the evenings, Rebecca would sit at the old desktop computer in Ellen's study, analyzing the files she'd taken from James. Evidence of fraud, manipulation, threats, names, dates, account numbers. The truth of what had been happening beneath the polished surface of Morgan Innovations for years. She worked methodically, organizing everything into clear, irrefutable documentation. One afternoon, Jack found her staring at the screen, her eyes red-rimmed from hours of work. "You don't have to fight this battle," he said softly, placing a mug of tea beside her. She looked up at him, resolve hardening in her gaze. "Yes, I do. People trusted me. Their livelihoods depend on that company. I can't just walk away knowing what he's doing." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then we'll figure it out together." In that moment, Rebecca realized something that startled her. She wasn't alone in this fight. For the first time in her career, she had someone standing beside her, not because of what she could offer them, but because they believed in her. Meanwhile, back in the city, James Wilson was growing desperate. The quarterly reports were due, and without Rebecca's signature on key documents, questions were being raised. Shareholders were nervous. The board was divided, and Sarah, Rebecca's former assistant, had begun quietly gathering her own evidence, inspired by her boss's sudden departure. James called another emergency meeting. Seated at the head of the table where Rebecca used to sit, he projected confidence he didn't feel. The situation is under control, he assured the room. Rebecca is taking some personal time to address health concerns, but she's in full support of our current direction. I've spoken with her legal team, and we have full authorization to proceed. It was a lie, and Sarah knew it. She sat quietly taking notes as always, but her eyes missed nothing. The way James's hand trembled slightly when he mentioned Rebecca's name. The way he avoided looking directly at certain board members. After the meeting, she stayed late, accessing files that would normally be restricted. What she found confirmed her suspicions. James had been systematically siphoning funds, manipulating contracts, and pressuring employees to falsify reports. Sarah hesitated only briefly before sending an encrypted message to the burner email address Rebecca had established years ago as an emergency back channel. They need to know what you found and what I found. How soon can we meet? The response came hours later. Not yet. Not safe. Keep gathering evidence. Be careful. He's watching. Back at the farmhouse, Rebecca's phone buzzed with Sarah's message. She read it, her face paling. Jack noticed immediately. What is it? Rebecca showed him the message. He's getting desperate, Jack. He'll start firing people soon to cover his tracks. I need to do something, but I can't go back there, not yet. Jack considered for a moment. You said your friend Sarah is still inside, right? Why not bring her here, away from his reach? It was a risk, but a calculated one. Rebecca nodded slowly. Yes, she's the only one I can truly trust there. Jack squeezed her hand. Then let's get her here. We'll figure out the next steps together. The message was sent, arrangements made. Sarah would take a weekend vacation to a destination she told no one about. But as Rebecca set down her phone, a notification appeared on the screen. A news alert from a financial blog. Morgan Innovations stock plummets amid leadership uncertainty. CFO Wilson announces restructuring. Rebecca clicked through her stomach, nodding as she read. James had announced a major streamlining initiative, corporate speak, for mass layoffs. 50 employees would lose their jobs by the end of the week. The article included a quote from James. While these decisions are difficult, they're necessary to maintain the vision that Rebecca Morgan and I built together. Rebecca fully supports these measures and will be making a statement upon her return. The phone nearly cracked in Rebecca's grip. That's a lie, she whispered, anger rising in her chest. I would never support this. He's firing innocent people to cover his tracks and using my name to do it. Jack read over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. So what are you going to do? Rebecca looked up at him, determination replacing fear in her eyes. I'm going to fight back, but I need to be smart about it. These people deserve better. She thought of the families behind those 50 names, the lives being upended. She couldn't hide anymore, not when her silence was being used to hurt others. That evening, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table with Jack, Ellen, and Sophie. Sophie was coloring, humming softly to herself, but the adult spoke in low, serious tones. I need to go back, Rebecca said. Not permanently, just long enough to expose what's happening. Ellen's weathered hands folded around her mug. It won't be easy. People like that, they fight dirty when cornered. I know, Rebecca acknowledged, but I can't let him destroy everything I built, everything those employees worked for. Jack studied her face. You sure about this? There's no going back once you step into that arena again. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. I'm sure. Some battles are worth fighting, even if you lose. Later, as Rebecca helped Sophie get ready for bed, the little girl looked up at her with solemn eyes. Are you going away? The question pierced Rebecca's heart. Not forever, sweetheart. Just for a little while. There are some people who need my help. Sophie considered this, then nodded. Like how Daddy helped you in the alley. Yes, exactly like that, Rebecca said, throat tightening with emotion. Sophie's small hand reached for hers. Then you have to go. Daddy says we always help people who need it. That's what good people do. The simple certainty in the child's voice brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. She pulled Sophie into a hug, inhaling the sweet scent of her shampoo, feeling the delicate bones beneath her star-patterned pajamas. I'll come back, Rebecca whispered against Sophie's curls. I promise. Sophie pulled back, regarding her seriously. Pinky promise, Rebecca linked her little finger with Sophie's. Pinky promise. And that night, as Sophie drifted to sleep, Rebecca sat beside her bed longer than usual, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the flutter of her eyelashes. This child had done what no business success ever could. She'd given Rebecca a reason beyond herself, beyond profit margins and market shares. A reason to be better, to fight harder, to come home. Because that's what the farmhouse had become in these short weeks home. And Rebecca would do whatever it took to protect it. It began with a phone call. Rebecca contacted one former board member. She believed she could still trust Eleanor Watts, a 70-year-old venture capitalist who had mentored Rebecca early in her career. Eleanor had retired last year but still held significant shares and influence. Their conversation was brief but productive. By its end, Rebecca had an ally in the beginnings of a plan. The next day, Sarah arrived at the farmhouse, bringing with her a hard drive full of evidence and news from inside Morgan Innovations. The situation was worse than they'd thought. James had accelerated his timeline, already clearing out departments loyal to Rebecca and replacing them with his own people. Morale was plummeting. Customers were getting nervous. Sarah, Rebecca, and Jack spent hours at the kitchen table, papers spread across its scarred wooden surface. Ellen kept them supplied with coffee and sandwiches while Sophie colored quietly nearby, occasionally bringing them pictures for courage. They mapped connections, identified vulnerabilities, built timelines. By midnight, they had a strategy risky but potentially devastating to James's plans. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday. James would be presenting his restructuring plan for formal approval. Rebecca would be there, not hiding, not apologizing, but armed with truth. Sarah would ensure that key employees and shareholders received certain documents minutes before the meeting began. Eleanor would raise the first questions, creating space for Rebecca to present her evidence. The night before she was set to return to the city, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She stood by the window in the guest room, looking out at the silhouettes of trees against the night sky. She heard the door open behind her but didn't turn. Jack's footsteps crossed the room, stopping beside her at the window. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but some parts of it I do. This is my company, my responsibility. The people who are losing their jobs, they trusted me." She turned to face him. "What if I fail, Jack? What if he wins?" Jack considered her question seriously, not rushing to offer false comfort. "Then you'll still have done the right thing, and you'll still have a home to come back to." Rebecca's breath caught. Her hand found his in the darkness. In that moment, she knew that whatever happened tomorrow, she had already found something more valuable than what she was fighting for. She had found belonging, acceptance, love, without conditions. And that gave her a different kind of strength, not the brittle armor of corporate power, but the resilient courage of knowing your true worth. Morning came too soon. Rebecca dressed in clothes Sarah had brought from her penthouse, a simple navy suit, minimal jewelry, low heels that accommodated her still healing ankle. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself, not because of the clothes, which were familiar, but because of the eyes that looked back at her. Clear, determined, unafraid. The eyes of someone who knew exactly what she was fighting for. Sophie insisted on making her a bracelet before she left, colored strings woven together in uneven patterns. For extra power, Sophie explained tying it around Rebecca's wrist. Ellen packed her a lunch because those fancy corporate places never feed you properly. Jack said little, but his eyes said everything as he helped her into the car. As they drove toward the city, tall buildings rising from the horizon like jagged teeth, Rebecca felt a strange calm settle over her. She had spent her whole career fighting to climb higher, to reach the top, to prove herself worthy. Now she was fighting for something else entirely, the right to choose her own path, to protect those who depended on her, to live with integrity rather than fear. Jack parked a block away from the Morgan Innovations headquarters. Close enough, but not directly in front. "I'll wait here," he said. Rebecca nodded, grateful for his presence, even if he couldn't accompany her inside. She reached for the door handle, then paused, turning back to him. "Whatever happens in there, thank you for seeing me, the real me." He reached across the console, his calloused hand covering hers. "Go get him, Tiger." The unexpected phrase, so ordinary, so unlike the corporate speak she was used to, made her laugh. The sound was bright in the car's quiet interior, a moment of lightness before the storm. Rebecca stepped out of the car, straightened her shoulders, and began walking toward the gleaming glass tower where she had once reigned. Each step was measured, deliberate, her slight limp a badge of what she'd survived rather than a sign of weakness. As she approached the entrance, she saw familiar faces turn in shock whispers, spreading like ripples in water. Rebecca Morgan was back. and nothing would ever be the same again. The boardroom was colder than she remembered, not in temperature, but in energy. Polished glass walls, marble floors, metal fixtures reflected every sterile inch of the space where Rebecca Morgan had once commanded attention with just a glance. Now she limped, her steps echoing in uneven rhythm, one heel slightly dragging from the healing ankle. She wore no designer gown, no diamond accessories, just a clean navy suit and determination burning in her eyes like fire refusing to be extinguished. Every head turned. The whispers started immediately. She came back. She actually showed up. What is she thinking? But no one stopped her. Even now, her presence commanded a certain respect that couldn't be erased. James Wilson stood at the front of the room, smug, relaxed in the seat that once belonged to her. He smirked, leaning into the microphone. "Miss Morgan," he said, oozing false politeness. "How unexpected. I assumed you'd finally accepted your place off the board, given your recent difficulties." The last words were pointed, a reminder of the narrative he'd constructed about her mental stability. Rebecca didn't flinch. She walked straight to the center of the room, steadying herself with one hand on the table as she faced the crowd of shareholders, executives, and former allies. Her voice was clear, unshaken. "I came back to finish this the right way." James opened his mouth to respond, but she raised her hand. Calm, quiet authority, the kind she used to wield like a blade. "I may not walk the same way I used to," she said, glancing briefly at her ankle. "But I stand taller now because I stand for myself and for every employee whose trust I earned." The room hushed. With one tap on the tablet Sarah had slipped to her, the large screens behind her lit up. Spreadsheets, emails, confidential memos, all of it streamed into the room. Proof of the fraudulent dealings, manipulated contracts, and the internal corruption orchestrated by James and several other board members. Gasp broke the silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Rebecca turned slowly, making eye contact with every person in the room. "You thought I disappeared because I was weak," she said. "But I left because I needed space to remember who I was before you all convinced me I had to be someone else. Before I lost sight of what truly matters." James stood abruptly, trying to regain control. "This is reckless. Do you have any idea what this could cost you?" She looked at him, really looked, and saw for the first time how small he truly was. "I do," she said, "and I'm ready to pay it." She pulled out a document from her folder and placed it on the table with deliberate precision. "This is my formal resignation, effective immediately. I'm relinquishing my position, my shares, and every last piece of control you ever thought you had over me." The silence that followed was thunderous. "You can keep your board seats, your stock options, your empire built on fear and silence," she added, "but I will no longer be part of it." One of the shareholders, an older woman who had mentored Rebecca in her early years, leaned forward. Her voice cracked as she whispered, why Rebecca's voice softened but gained even more strength. "Because I am not a product. I am not a brand. I am not a bargaining chip in someone else's game. I am a person." The older woman nodded slowly, blinking back emotion. James, still standing, tried one more time. "You'll regret this. You're throwing away everything." Rebecca gave him one last look. "No," she said. "I'm walking away from something that never truly belonged to me in the first place. I'm choosing what does." As she gathered her tablet and folder with quiet grace, a young woman stepped forward from the back of the room, Sarah, her former assistant, now holding a USB drive. Before anyone could stop her, Sarah plugged it into the main system. More documents appeared on screen, the complete evidence of James's dealings now streaming directly to every shareholder's email. "For those of you who care about this company's future," Sarah said clearly, "everything you need is in your inbox. The rest is up to you." As Rebecca walked out step by limping step, no one dared stop her. Not this time. And when the elevator doors closed behind her, she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She exhaled. Outside, the sun had begun to set. The sky glowed with amber and rose. The city below hummed with life, oblivious to the small revolution that had just occurred above. Rebecca stepped onto the sidewalk not as a CEO, but as a woman who had finally chosen herself. And for the first time in years, her shoulders weren't carrying an empire, only her truth. And that was more than enough. She walked slowly toward the car where Jack waited, her steps growing lighter with each block she put between herself and her past. When she slid into the passenger seat, Jack didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. The peace in her eyes told him everything. He simply started the engine and asked. Home. Rebecca looked at him. Really looked at this man who had stepped into the darkness for a stranger, who had offered safety without demands, who had shown her what it meant to be valued simply for existing. Yes, she said, let's go home. As they drove away from the gleaming towers of corporate power, Rebecca's phone began buzzing with notifications. News alerts, messages, calls. The story was breaking already. James Wilson arrested on fraud charges. Morgan Innovations stock plummeting. Board in emergency session. She turned off the phone without reading further. Tomorrow would be time enough for consequences. Tonight was for going home. Sophie was waiting on the porch steps when they arrived, having refused to go to bed until Rebecca returned. She flew down the steps as the car pulled up, launching herself into Rebecca's arms with complete faith that she would be caught. And she was. Rebecca held her close, breathing in the scent of crayons and children's shampoo, feeling small arms wrap around her neck with perfect trust. Did you win? Sophie whispered against her ear. Rebecca smiled, looking over the child's shoulder at Jack, who stood watching them with quiet joy. Yes, sweetheart, she said. I won something much more important than I went looking for. That night, as moonlight spilled through the farmhouse windows and crickets sang in the fields beyond, Rebecca Morgan slept peacefully for the first time in years. Not as a CEO, not as an heiress, not as a brand or a strategy or an asset, just as herself. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The farmhouse became sanctuary, a place where Rebecca shed the armor she'd worn for years. Fall deepened around them, painting the surrounding trees in fierce oranges and reds. Rebecca's ankle healed, allowing her to explore the property, with Sophie collecting fallen leaves and pressing them between book pages. These quiet moments, kneading bread, with Ellen helping Sophie with homework, watching Jack repair the porch railing, filled the empty spaces inside her that power and money never could. But sanctuary wasn't isolation. News from the city arrived in steady waves. James Wilson had been arrested, released on bail, and now faced multiple federal charges. Morgan Innovation stock had plummeted, then stabilized, as an interim CEO, Eleanor Watts, coming out of retirement, implemented emergency measures. Former employees sent messages of gratitude through Sarah, who visited weekends bringing updates and legal documents requiring Rebecca's signature. What Rebecca hadn't anticipated was the media attention. Her dramatic resignation had triggered speculation, with financial blogs and business magazines dissecting every aspect of the story. James gave interviews claiming Rebecca had suffered a breakdown, portraying himself as the loyal lieutenant trying to salvage the company while she recovered. These narratives found fertile ground in a business world eager to explain away a powerful woman's rejection of the system that had elevated her. Morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Rebecca scrolled through another article on her tablet. The headline blared, "Morgan's Meltdown: How a Tech Titan Crumbled Under Pressure." Jack glanced over her shoulder, his expression darkening. These vultures don't know when to quit. Rebecca set the tablet down, pushing it away like something contaminated. It shouldn't bother me. I know the truth. But it did bother her. Not for her reputation, she'd surrendered that willingly, but for the employees still at Morgan Innovations navigating the fallout of her actions. For the women in tech who'd looked to her as an example. For Sophie, who might someday Google her name and find these stories. Jack seemed to read her thoughts. The nice thing about storms, he said, filling her coffee cup, is they always pass. People will forget about you soon enough. Something else will grab the headlines. Rebecca smiled gratefully, but uncertainty lingered. In her former world, invisibility had never been an option. She'd been trained to command attention, to ensure her presence was felt in every room. Now she was learning the value of shadows, of quiet, of going unnoticed. Sophie bounded into the kitchen, backpack slung over one shoulder, her curls barely contained by rainbow clips. "School project today," she announced, reaching for the toast Jack had prepared. Rebecca watched her butter it methodically, tongue peeking out in concentration. "Can you help me, Rebecca? It's about important women in history." Rebecca's breath caught. "What did you tell your teacher about me?" Sophie looked confused by the question. "I said you're a businesswoman who helped me with math." Rebecca exchanged glances with Jack, relief washing through her. They'd been careful about what Sophie knew about what she might repeat at school. Her innocence remained their best protection from unwanted attention. After dropping Sophie at school, Jack and Rebecca drove into town for supplies. The local hardware store had become a familiar stop, its narrow aisles and dusty merchandise, a world away from the sleek boutiques Rebecca once frequented. The owner, Hank, nodded as they entered. He'd stopped staring at Rebecca weeks ago when he'd realized she was just another customer, not the celebrity her designer clothes initially suggested. As Jack discussed pipe fittings with Hank, Rebecca wandered toward the garden section. She'd been helping Ellen prepare beds for spring planting, finding unexpected satisfaction in the physical labor, the direct connection between effort and result. So different from corporate life, where success was measured in abstractions, market share, quarterly projections, brand valuation. A television mounted in the corner caught her attention. The local news was running a business segment. Rebecca froze when she saw James Wilson's face filling the screen. The sound was muted, but the crawl beneath showed the headline, "Former CFO Wilson Claims Exoneration. Imminent Morgan Innovations Recovery Plan Announced." Rebecca moved closer, straining to hear despite the muted volume. James looked confident, composed nothing like a man facing criminal charges. She'd seen this before, how the right suit, the right smile, the right words could construct an illusion of legitimacy regardless of facts. He was using the playbook she'd helped write. Jack appeared at her side, following her gaze to the screen. "That guy doesn't quit, does he?" Rebecca shook her head, unease spreading through her chest. "He's claiming the charges will be dropped." "That can't be right. Sarah would have told us if something changed." Jack touched her elbow gently. "Let's call her when we get back to the farm." The drive home was quiet, Rebecca lost in thought. The countryside blurred outside the window, its beauty temporarily invisible to her. She'd walked away believing the evidence was overwhelming that justice would follow its natural course. But James had connections, resources. She'd underestimated him before. Back at the farmhouse, Rebecca paced the porch while waiting for Sarah to return her call. When the phone finally rang, Sarah's voice carried immediate reassurance. "Don't worry about Wilson's PR stunts. The prosecution has solid evidence. Nothing's changed." Rebecca's shoulders relaxed marginally. "But why is he so confident? He must have an angle we're not seeing." Sarah hesitated, the silence stretching between them. "There is something. He's trying to flip some of the junior executives, offering them immunity if they testify that you approved everything. Say you were the mastermind and he was just following orders." Rebecca gripped the porch railing, knuckles whitening. "That's absurd. No one would believe that." But Sarah's tone remained serious. "You've been gone for weeks, Rebecca. People's memories are malleable, especially when their careers are on the line. Some of them are scared, looking for a way out. And James is very persuasive. You know that better than anyone." The conversation ended with promises to stay vigilant, but Rebecca remained on the porch long after watching darkness claim the fields. Jack found her there, hours later, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. She didn't turn as he settled beside her. The stars glittered overhead, impossibly bright this far from city lights. He didn't press her to speak, comfortable with silence, in a way she was still learning. People see what they expect to see. Rebecca finally said, her voice barely audible above the evening breeze. "I built my life on that principle. Creating the image of competence, control. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect answers. If I controlled what they saw, I controlled what they thought." She pulled the blanket tighter. Now James is using the same trick, creating a new reality by sheer force of confidence. Jack considered this his profile sharp against the night sky. Sounds exhausting. Always pretending. Rebecca laughed, a soft, surprised sound. It was. Still is sometimes. Even here. His head turned to eyebrows raised in question. She met his gaze. "I catch myself performing, trying to be what I think you want. The perfect guest. The perfect whatever I am to Sophie, but I don't know how to just be." His hand found hers under the blanket rough palm against her smoother one. "You don't have to perform here. We like the real Rebecca, the one who burns pancakes and swears when she stubs her toe. The one who spent 3 hours helping Sophie build that ridiculous birdhouse. That's who we see. Not the woman on magazine covers." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, letting his warmth seep through the layers between them. What if James wins? What if he turns this around somehow? Jack's answer came without hesitation. "Then we deal with it. Together. You're not alone in this fight anymore." She closed her eyes, absorbing the simple truth of his words, wishing she could believe them completely. Morning brought chaos to the farmhouse. Ellen burst into the kitchen as Rebecca and Jack were making breakfast, her normally calm demeanor shattered. "Have you seen the news?" She thrust her tablet forward, displaying a headline that made Rebecca's stomach lurch. "Morgan scandal deepens, former CEO's whereabouts unknown as new allegations surface." Rebecca scanned the article, blood rushing in her ears. James had given another interview, this one more detailed. He claimed Rebecca had embezzled company funds before disappearing, suggesting her dramatic boardroom exit had been a calculated distraction. More damning, he produced emails fabricated Rebecca knew immediately, showing her apparent authorization of the very fraud she'd accused him of orchestrating. The article mentioned an investigation into Rebecca's finances statements from anonymous sources claiming she'd withdrawn large sums before vanishing. It painted a picture of a woman cornered by her own schemes, fleeing justice rather than facing consequences. The final paragraph noted that authorities were seeking information on her location. Rebecca set the tablet down, her hands trembling. "It's all lies, every word." Jack rayed over her shoulder, his jaw tightening. "But he's playing a dangerous game, claiming you're hiding when he knows exactly where you went that night. He's setting you up." Rebecca nodded, mind racing through implications. "If anyone believes I'm on the run, anything I say later looks like desperate excuses." Ellen's voice broke through her thoughts. "There's more. A reporter was asking questions at Sophie's school yesterday. The principal called me this morning." She was concerned. Rebecca's eyes darted to the stairs where Sophie might appear any moment. "Did they talk to her?" Ellen shook her head. "No," the principal intervened. "But it's only a matter of time before someone connects the dots." Fear, cold and familiar, slid down Rebecca's spine. They'd been careful. Used cash kept a low profile. But small towns noticed strangers, especially ones who arrived suddenly with a city accent and designer clothes. Someone had talked. Someone had recognized her. Jack's expression had hardened into something Rebecca hadn't seen before, the look of a man preparing for battle. "We need to move, today." His tone left no room for argument. "If they found the school, they'll find the farm. I'll call Mike, his cabin in the mountains. No address, just GPS coordinates. We can be there by nightfall." The next hours passed in controlled frenzy. Rebecca helped Sophie pack, explaining they were taking a surprise vacation to a special hideaway in the woods. Sophie, sensing the tension beneath their forced cheerfulness, asked fewer questions than usual. Ellen would stay behind, maintaining appearances ready with a cover story if anyone came looking. As Jack loaded the last bag into the truck, Rebecca's phone buzzed. Sarah. The message was brief but chilling. "DOJ, freezing your accounts as precautionary measure. Wilson's lawyers pushed for it. I'm working on it. Stay dark." Rebecca showed Jack her financial safety net vanishing before her eyes. He nodded grimly. All the more reason to disappear for a while. They left as afternoon shadows lengthened across the fields, taking back roads to avoid main highways. Sophie sat between them in the truck's cab, unusually quiet, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Rebecca tried to focus on practical matters, how long their cash would last, what they'd need at this remote cabin, rather than the larger implications of their flight. Leaving meant looking guilty. Staying meant risking Sophie's safety and peace of mind. There were no good choices, only less terrible ones. This was the calculus of her new reality. The price of walking away from power wasn't just the power itself, but the protection it had provided. The cabin appeared as darkness fell, a solid shadow against deeper shadows. "No electricity," Jack explained as he unlocked the door, "just a generator for essentials. Solar panels for basic needs. Wood stove for heat." His friend Mike, a fellow firefighter, had built it as a retreat after his own retirement. Inside, the space was small but sturdy. Rough-hewn furniture, a stone fireplace, shelves stocked with canned goods and emergency supplies. A loft above held two narrow beds. The scent of cedar and wood smoke hung in the air, oddly comforting in its primal simplicity. Jack moved efficiently, lighting lanterns, starting the generator, checking water supplies. Rebecca helped Sophie settle into one of the loft beds, tucking her in with extra blankets against the mountain chill. The little girl's eyes were heavy with exhaustion from the journey, but her questions were pointed beyond her years. "Are the bad people looking for us, like in my storybooks?" Rebecca smoothed a curl from Sophie's forehead, choosing her words carefully. "Some people are saying things about me that aren't true. We're just staying here until we can fix it. Like when you and your dad fixed the house after the storm knocked it down." Sophie considered this, the analogy making sense in her 6-year-old logic, But we came back for the birds. They were counting on us. The simple observation caught Rebecca off guard. Yes, she managed throat tight. And I'll go back too when it's time to fix what's broken. Sophie nodded, satisfied, her eyes drifting closed. Rebecca stayed beside her until her breathing deepened into sleep, wondering at the wisdom that sometimes emerged from this child's innocent perspective. Downstairs, Jack had built a fire in the stone hearth, its flickering light casting long shadows across the cabin's interior. He handed Rebecca a mug of tea, the warmth welcome against the night's growing chill. They sat on a worn leather couch, the silence between them comfortable, despite the circumstances. We can't run forever, Rebecca finally said, voicing the thought that had followed her up the mountain. Jack nodded, firelight playing across his features. No, but we can buy time. Let the truth catch up to the lies. She turned the mug in her hands. And if it doesn't, if his version becomes the accepted narrative, the question hung in the air, unanswerable. Jack shifted to face her more directly. Do you regret it? Walking away? The question was fair but complex. Rebecca considered her answer carefully. I regret that people are being hurt by the fallout. I regret not seeing James for what he was sooner. She paused, looking into the flames, but leaving that world, no. I don't regret choosing something real over something that looked perfect but was hollow inside. Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. In the strange amber light with danger circling their temporary refuge, Rebecca felt a clarity she'd rarely experienced in her previous life of luxury and power. Here was truth stripped of pretense. A man who asked hard questions and listened to the answers. A child sleeping peacefully above them, trusting they would keep her safe. A choice to be made not about stock options or merger strategies, but about what kind of life was worth the fight. Jack's hand found hers, his voice low. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. All the way. Rebecca interlaced her fingers with his, the simple connection anchoring her amid uncertainty. This, she realized, was what had been missing in her life of achievements and acquisitions. Not wealth or recognition or power, but partnership. Someone who stood beside you, not for what you could provide, but simply because they chose to day after day. Morning brought a crystalline clarity to the mountain's sunlight spearing through pine branches and illuminating dust motes in the cabin's interior. Sophie woke first, her excited voice calling them to see deer grazing in the clearing outside. For a moment, watching her press small palms against the window glass, Rebecca could almost pretend they were simply on vacation, not fugitives from a narrative designed to destroy her. Jack prepared a simple breakfast on the wood stove, oatmeal with dried berries and honey. As they ate, he outlined practical considerations. The generator had enough fuel for a week. Food supplies would last longer. The nearest town was 30 miles away, a place small enough that strangers would be noticed. Better to limit trips, use cash only when necessary. Rebecca listened, mentally calculating their resources against an uncertain timeline. Her frozen accounts meant their safety net was Jack's savings and whatever cash they'd brought. Not insignificant, but finite. A clock ticking down to difficult decisions. After breakfast, Jack took Sophie outside to gather firewood and explore the immediate surroundings. Rebecca used the satellite phone he'd provided, untraceable. He'd assured her to contact Sarah. The connection was poor, breaking her former assistant's voice into static-filled fragments. But the message came through clearly enough. James's strategy was working. The financial press had largely accepted his version of events. Former employees facing pressure and uncertain futures were beginning to corroborate his claims rather than defend Rebecca. More concerning, the Department of Justice investigation had shifted focus. While James remained under scrutiny, Rebecca was now a primary target. Sarah's voice crackled with urgency. You need to come back. Clear your name. Hiding makes you look guilty. Rebecca paced the small cabin as she replied, I have Sophie to think about. The media would tear her apart. There has to be another way. The call ended with no resolution, only promises to stay in touch. Rebecca sat on the cabin steps afterward, watching Jack and Sophie by the edge of the forest. They were building something with fallen branches, a lean-to or fort, it appeared. Sophie's laughter carried across the clearing, bright and uncomplicated. This child deserves stability, not a life on the run with a woman whose name might become synonymous with corporate fraud. Jack deserved a partner who didn't bring chaos and danger to his door. The thoughts circled like vultures, picking at Rebecca's resolve. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Rebecca showed Jack the satellite phone's screen. A news alert from a financial outlet. Morgan Innovations announces restructuring plan under Wilson's guidance board, expresses full confidence, despite pending investigation. And the company was moving on without her, the narrative shifting to portray James as the savior rather than the villain. Jack studied the screen, his expression unreadable in the firelight. So they're choosing the convenient lie over the messy truth. Rebecca took the phone back, her voice tight. They're choosing stability. The markets hate uncertainty. James offers a clear path forward. I'm just a problem that disappeared. Convenient for everyone. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. Not for the people who were fired. Not for the investors who lose money when the real fraud eventually surfaces. Not for you. Rebecca sighed, exhaustion seeping into her bones. But what can I do from here? Go back and face a system that's already decided I'm guilty. With what leverage? Jack was silent for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. When I was firefighting, we had this rule. If you're trapped, if you can't find a way out, his gaze met hers. You make a stand and you change the conditions. You don't accept the fire's terms. You create new terms. Rebecca considered his words, something shifting in her perspective. Not surrender, not passive acceptance, but a different kind of fight. Days blended together at the cabin, a strange interlude apart from time. Sophie adapted with the resilience of childhood, turning their hideaway into an adventure. She collected pine cones and interesting stones, created elaborate stories about forest creatures, helped with simple chores around the cabin. In her world, they were explorers on a secret mission, not people hiding from accusation and scrutiny. Jack maintained the satellite phone as their tenuous connection to the outside world. News from Sarah grew increasingly concerning. James had consolidated his position, presenting himself as the steady hand guiding Morgan Innovations through troubled waters. The board had rallied behind him, perhaps out of pragmatism, perhaps out of fear. The investigation continued, but witnesses were changing statements, evidence becoming muddied. The narrative solidified. Rebecca Morgan, once a tech darling, had orchestrated financial misdeeds and fled when discovery was imminent. Her dramatic boardroom exit was recast as a calculated distraction. Her resignation, a preemptive abandonment of a sinking ship. She had sabotaged herself. A week into their mountain exile, Rebecca sat with Jack on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in impossible colors. Sophie was inside, carefully arranging her rock collection by size and color, a project that had occupied her for hours. I've been thinking about what you said. Rebecca began, her voice quiet against the evening chorus of insects and distant birdsong. About changing the conditions, not playing by their rules. Jack waited, sensing she had more to say. The system is stacked against me now. Legal channels, media narratives, corporate politics, they're all aligned with James's version of reality. She turned to face him fully. So I need to create a new reality, one that doesn't depend on their validation or approval. Jack's expression remained neutral, but interest sparked in his eyes. What are you thinking? Rebecca straightened, energy infusing her voice for the first time in days. The evidence we have, it's not just about corporate fraud. It shows systematic exploitation of employees' harassment threats. There are people who suffered under James's leadership, people whose stories were silenced by NDAs and settlements. Her mind raced ahead, mapping possibilities. What if I created a space for those stories, a platform outside the corporate structure, beyond James's reach? Not just about clearing my name, but about changing the conversation entirely. Jack considered this mind, working through implications. You're talking about going public in a different way. Not through business channels, but through what activism? Rebecca nodded, the idea crystallizing as she spoke. Exactly. Creating a nonprofit focused on corporate accountability and employee protection. Using my visibility, even the negative attention, to spotlight issues bigger than my personal situation. She leaned forward, intensity building in her voice. James wants this to be about me versus him, about who controls Morgan Innovations. I need to make it about something larger, something he can't spin or control. Fireflies began to appear at the edge of the clearing, their intermittent glow like scattered stars fallen to earth. Jack watched them, considering Rebecca's words. It's risky. Going public means exposing yourself. exposing Sophie to the attention you've been protecting her from. Rebecca nodded, acknowledging the truth in his caution. I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. This affects you both. I won't do it if you think the cost is too high. The question hung between them, weighted with implications for their shared future. Jack's answer when it came was measured. Sophie and I were doing okay before you crashed into our lives. He began, a hint of wry humor in his tone. We've weathered storms before. She's stronger than you might think. His eyes met Rebecca's, and so am I. If this is the fight you choose, we'll stand with you. But it has to be your decision. Your conviction. Rebecca felt something shift inside her, not the adrenaline rush of corporate combat, but something steadier, more grounded. This wasn't about winning or dominance. It was about standing for something that mattered even when victory wasn't guaranteed. About creating something new from the ashes of what she'd walked away from. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. James would fight back harder and dirtier when cornered. The media would sensationalize every aspect of her reemergence. Sophie would face questions and attention no child should have to navigate. But staying hidden meant surrendering to a false narrative, abandoning others, still caught in systems of exploitation and silencing. Some battles choose you, Rebecca realized. This one had found her in an alley on a rainy night, had followed her to a farmhouse sanctuary, had pursued her up a mountain to this moment of decision. Perhaps it had been waiting for her all along, through years of compromise, and looking the other way through success, built on systems she hadn't questioned deeply enough. She reached for Jack's hand, finding solace in its warmth, its steadiness. I want to build something that matters, she said simply. Something that helps people who don't have the resources or platform to fight back. Something Sophie could be proud of someday. Jack's fingers tightened around hers, his silent support more powerful than any verbal encouragement. Inside the cabin, Sophie's voice called out, bright with discovery. She'd found a stone that glittered in the lamplight, a treasure demanding immediate appreciation. Rebecca and Jack exchanged glances, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Whatever battles lay ahead, they would face them as a family, unconventional, unplanned, but stronger together than apart. Rebecca rose first, still holding Jack's hand. Time to admire a 6-year-old's rock collection. Time to plan a revolution. Sometimes she was discovering the most important things happened simultaneously, the profound and the mundane, intertwined in ways her former life had never allowed her to appreciate. She stepped toward the cabin door, toward a future she was choosing with open eyes and clear purpose. Behind her, the mountains stood sentinel against the deepening night, solid and enduring, as the truth she would fight to establish. When she slid into the passenger seat, Jack didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. The peace in her eyes told him everything. He simply started the engine and asked, home. Rebecca looked at him. Really looked at this man who had stepped into the darkness for a stranger, who had offered safety without demands, who had shown her what it meant to be valued simply for existing. Yes, she said. Let's go home. As they drove away from the gleaming towers of corporate power, Rebecca's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. News alerts about Wilson's resignation citing health concerns. Messages from former colleagues, some congratulatory, others clearly attempting to reposition themselves in her good graces. Emails from journalists seeking exclusive follow-ups. She silenced the device, sliding it into her bag. Tomorrow would be time enough for consequences. Tonight was for family. Sophie was waiting at Ellen's apartment, having refused to go to bed until Rebecca returned. The moment Rebecca stepped through the door, Sophie launched herself forward with complete faith she would be caught. And she was. Rebecca held her close, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and cookie crumbs, feeling small arms wrap around her neck with perfect trust. Did you win? Sophie whispered against her ear. Rebecca smiled, looking over the child's shoulder at Jack, who stood watching them with quiet pride. Yes, sweetheart, she said, but not in the way I expected. I found something much more important than what I was looking for. Later, after Sophie had finally succumbed to sleep, the adults gathered around Ellen's kitchen table. Sarah had joined them, bringing a bottle of champagne and 4 files she'd managed to extract from Morgan Innovation servers before her clearance was revoked. Insurance, she called it, against any backsliding on James's part. The former assistant had proven herself not just loyal, but cunning, qualities Rebecca had always valued, but never fully appreciated until now. I still can't believe it worked, Sarah admitted, twisting her glass by the stem. When you first hired me 5 years ago, you were so... She paused, searching for a diplomatic term. Formidable, Rebecca supplied with a wry smile. Terrifying, Sarah corrected, returning the smile. I never imagined we'd end up here. Rebecca understood the sentiment. 5 years ago, she'd been at the height of her corporate power, meticulous, demanding, viewing people primarily as assets or obstacles. Sarah had been her third assistant in a year, the others having fled what office gossip called the Morgan pressure cooker. But Sarah had stayed, gradually becoming something beyond an employee, a confidant, an ally, and now it seemed a friend. Ellen raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said simply. The words carried weight around the table, each person contemplating their own version of beginning again. For Rebecca, it was life beyond corporate identity. For Jack, partnership after years of lonely parenthood. For Sarah, purpose beyond service to someone else's vision. The following morning brought reality crashing back in the form of headlines splashed across every financial publication. Wilson out, Morgan vindicated. Tech titan returns from exile. Corporate coup inside the Morgan Innovations drama. Most stories framed the resolution as Rebecca's triumphant return to power, completely missing the point of her resignation. Few mentioned the ethics committee or whistleblower protections, details that mattered more to her than personal redemption. Rebecca's phone rang while she was helping Sophie with breakfast. Eleanor Watts, calling to confirm their agreement, was being implemented as discussed. The board's already having second thoughts, Eleanor admitted. They were wondering if the ethics committee needs quite such extensive oversight powers. Rebecca wasn't surprised. Institutions resisted accountability by reflex. We hold firm, she replied. Or I share the remaining evidence with Melissa Winters. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle from Eleanor. You always were a quick study in leverage. Very well, I'll keep them in line. Jack watched this exchange from across the kitchen, a complex emotion playing across his features. When Rebecca ended the call, he voiced the question she'd been expecting. What now? For us, I mean. This apartment's temporary. My job prospects in the city are limited. Sophie needs stability. His concerns were practical, grounded in the day-to-day realities she was only beginning to understand. Are you thinking about going back to the farmhouse? Rebecca considered this possibility. The farmhouse had been sanctuary, a place of healing, but it had also been hiding, a retreat rather than a foundation. No, she decided. I want to build something, not just recover from what was broken. The Sophie Foundation needs to be in the city, close to the companies and people it aims to help. She reached across the counter, taking his hand. And I need to be where my family is, if that's still what you want. The relief that washed across Jack's face was answer enough, but his words made it concrete. Sophie and I are wherever you are now. That's not changing. But we need a plan, a real one, not just reacting to the next crisis. Rebecca nodded. He was right. They'd been in survival mode for so long that deliberate planning felt almost foreign. Over the next days, while Sophie attended school with Ellen's protective escort, Rebecca and Jack created a roadmap for their shared future. Sarah joined them for strategy sessions, her organizational skills proving invaluable. Angela Chen advised on legal structures for the foundation, while Eleanor provided insights into corporate vulnerabilities the foundation could leverage for reform. 2 weeks after the press conference, they gathered in Angela's office to officially incorporate the Sophie Foundation. The paperwork was straightforward, but the moment carried emotional weight Rebecca hadn't anticipated. As she signed her name to the founding documents, she realized she was committing to something more lasting than quarterly profits or market share. She was building a legacy based on accountability rather than acquisition. Sophie, watching from a nearby chair where she'd been contentedly coloring, seemed to sense the importance of the moment. She approached the table, peering at the document where her name appeared in official type. Is that really my name on a real grown-up paper? Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Jack knelt beside his daughter, his voice gentle. The foundation is named after you, Soph, because you helped Rebecca understand what's really important. Sophie considered this with the solemn concentration children sometimes bring to adult matters. Will it help people, like when you help fix things that are broken? Rebecca found her voice. Yes, exactly that. It will help fix things in companies that aren't working right, that hurt people instead of helping them. Sophie nodded, satisfied with this explanation. Then it's good. She returned to her coloring, the matter settled with childlike certainty. Financial reality soon intruded on their planning. While the Department of Justice had unfrozen some of Rebecca's personal accounts following the settlement, her resources were more limited than most assumed. The corporate compensation package she'd negotiated included funding for the foundation, but those funds were tied to specific programs and couldn't cover their living expenses. I never realized how much of my wealth was tied to Morgan stock options, Rebecca admitted to Jack one evening as they reviewed their budget. The cash reserves I kept liquid, it's substantial by normal standards, but not enough to fund the foundation and support us indefinitely. Jack's expression remained neutral, but she could read his concern. I've been thinking about that, he said. I've got a buddy from the department who started an appliance repair business. He's looking for a partner. Rebecca watched understanding dawn in Jack's eyes as she processed the implications. You'd go back to repair work? He nodded, no hesitation in his response. It's honest work. I'm good at it. And ironically, there's more demand for fixing things than replacing them in an economic downturn. She felt a surge of admiration for this man who measured success not by status but by utility, by the tangible difference his hands could make in the world. Before she could respond, he continued. Besides the foundations, your vision. You should focus there without worrying about keeping the lights on. It was a gift she realized, not just financial support, but freedom to pursue purpose without compromise. Thank you, she said simply, the words inadequate for the offering. Sarah became the foundation's first official employee, beyond Rebecca herself taking a substantial pay cut from her corporate salary to serve as operations director. When Rebecca expressed concern about this sacrifice, Sarah laughed. Trust me, she said, money doesn't compensate for watching your soul die one PowerPoint at a time. I'd rather do something that matters. Together, they designed the foundation's first initiative, a secure platform for corporate whistleblowers to share experiences and evidence without fear of identification or retaliation. Legal support, psychological counseling, and career coaching would accompany the reporting system, addressing the very real costs of ethical stands in corporate environments. As they built the platform, testimonies began arriving tentatively at first, then in growing numbers as word spread. Former Morgan Innovations employees shared stories of retaliation after reporting harassment. Engineers described being pressured to bypass safety protocols to meet deadlines. Financial analysts admitted to manipulating projections to please investors. Each story confirmed what Rebecca had come to understand. Her experience with James wasn't an anomaly, but a symptom of systemic dysfunction. That's why he almost won, she told Jack one night as they sorted through another batch of submissions. The system is designed to protect people like James, to discredit anyone who challenges them, especially women. Jack considered this, his expression thoughtful. But you beat the system. You found a way out that didn't require playing by their rules. Rebecca leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. Not alone, I had help. The quiet acknowledgement hung between them, a truth neither needed to elaborate. April brought apartment hunting expeditions with Sophie, enthusiastically evaluating each potential home based on criteria only a 6-year-old would prioritize. This one has good hiding places, she announced, in one empty Brooklyn brownstone with oddly placed closets. And listen, the floors are squeaky, which means no monsters can sneak in. Her practical concerns made Rebecca laugh, a welcome relief from the stress of balancing budget constraints against their needs. The brownstone they eventually chose was modest by Rebecca's former standards, a 2-story unit in a converted building with worn wooden floors and windows that stuck in humid weather. But it had a tiny backyard where Sophie immediately began planning a garden and enough space for a home office where Rebecca could work when not at the foundation headquarters. Moving day brought Ellen from the farmhouse bearing housewarming gifts of homemade bread and jars of preserves. Jack's former colleagues from the fire department arrived without being asked, forming an efficient chain to unload the rental truck. Rebecca watched this communal effort with something approaching wonder. In her previous life, she would have hired professionals maintain distance. Now she found herself passing bottles of water to sweaty firefighters, learning their names and stories between trips up the stairs. One of them, Mike, pulled Jack aside for a conversation that ended with handshakes and backslaps. Jack returned to Rebecca's side, looking pleased. Mike's appliance repair business, he explained. He wants me to start next week. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work, and he's offering a partnership track. Rebecca felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with status, and everything to do with witnessing Jack rebuild his professional life alongside their personal one. That night, after everyone had gone and Sophie had fallen asleep surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, Rebecca and Jack sat on the back steps of their new home, sharing a bottle of wine under the sparse stars visible through city light pollution. "It's not what you're used to," Jack said, gesturing at their surroundings, the small yard, the neighboring buildings pressing close, the distant sound of traffic. Rebecca followed his gaze, seeing not limitations, but possibilities. "No," she agreed, "it's better." He turned to her, surprise evident in his expression. She elaborated, "My old life was curated, perfect and empty." This as she indicated the slightly crooked steps beneath them, the boxes waiting to be unpacked, the garden space where weeds currently outnumbered plants. "This is real, imperfect, alive." He didn't respond with words, just drew her closer, his arms solid around her shoulders as they contemplated their shared space under the night sky. The Sophie Foundation's official launch came in May, with a website unveiling and press release that generated moderate coverage in business publications. Rebecca had deliberately kept the event low-key, wanting the foundation's work rather than her name to drive attention. Still, her connection to the Morgan innovation scandal ensured some media presence, most framing the foundation as either redemption narrative or revenge project, simplistic readings that missed the larger purpose. Melissa Winters, true to her investigative instincts, was the only journalist who seemed to grasp the foundation's potential beyond the personal drama. Her follow-up article, Beyond Whistleblowing: The Structural Reform Promise of the Sophie Foundation, delved into the systemic issues the foundation aimed to address. The piece quoted Eleanor Watts, acknowledging that even well-intentioned companies could develop toxic patterns without proper checks and balances. The article generated the foundation's first significant donation, an anonymous contribution substantial enough to fund their legal aid program for a year. Rebecca suspected Eleanor might be the source, though the older woman denied involvement when asked directly. "Does it matter where the money comes from?" Eleanor challenged during their monthly catch-up lunch. "As long as it's not compromising your mission." Rebecca considered this pragmatic view so typical of her former mentor. Once she would have agreed without hesitation, now she recognized that sources mattered as much as amounts. The foundation needed to be funded by those who believed in its mission, not those seeking to influence or control its direction. Still, she accepted the donation, recognizing that principled stands required practical foundations. By June, the foundation had processed over 200 whistleblower reports, provided legal consultation to 37 individuals facing retaliation, and developed best practice guidelines that 3 major tech companies had voluntarily adopted. It wasn't revolution, but it was measurable progress, concrete change beyond what Rebecca had initially imagined possible. Sarah proved instrumental in this growth, her institutional knowledge of corporate structures allowing the foundation to target interventions where they would be most effective. Her network of contacts throughout the industry provided intelligence on which companies were genuinely interested in reform versus those performing ethical theater for public relations purposes. "I underestimated you for years," Rebecca admitted to Sarah one evening as they reviewed quarterly metrics. Sarah looked up from her laptop, eyebrow raised in question. Rebecca clarified, "I saw you as efficient, loyal, discreet, all the qualities I valued in an assistant, but I never recognized how strategic you are, how much you understand the games being played." Sarah's expression softened. "You were fair," she acknowledged. "Demanding, but fair. And you taught me a lot, even if that wasn't your intention." Jack's appliance repair partnership flourished in unexpected ways. His technical skills paired well with his partner Mike's business acumen, and they soon found themselves specializing in high-end appliances, other repair services deemed unfixable. "There's something satisfying about telling some rich guy his $5,000 refrigerator isn't destined for a landfill," Jack commented after a particularly challenging repair. "Like maybe we're all a little less disposable than we've been told." Sophie thrived in her new school, her natural resilience helping her adapt to urban education after rural simplicity. Her teacher contacted them in early June requesting a conference. Rebecca and Jack arrived at the appointment with trepidation, uncertain what issues might have arisen. Instead, they were met with praise for Sophie's emotional intelligence and creative problem-solving qualities the teacher attributed to her unusual family situation. "She has this remarkable ability to make other children feel included," the teacher explained. Yesterday, a new student was sitting alone at lunch, and Sophie not only invited her to join, but had already learned how to say welcome in the girl's native language. Jack beamed with pride while Rebecca felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. This child who had embraced her so completely was extending that same acceptance to others, creating belonging where she went. On a sweltering July afternoon, Rebecca was leaving a meeting with corporate partners when she spotted a familiar figure across the restaurant's patio. James Wilson sat alone at a corner table, nursing what appeared to be a scotch, his expression distant. Her first instinct was retreat. They hadn't spoken since his resignation, and she had no desire to revisit that chapter. But as she watched him signal for another drink, a different impulse surfaced. She approached his table deliberately, giving him ample time to register her presence. His eyes widened briefly in recognition, then narrowed with caution. Rebecca, he acknowledged his tone, carefully neutral. She nodded once. James, may I? She indicated the empty chair across from him. After a moment's hesitation, he gestured permission. They regarded each other in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. He looked older than as she remembered, new lines etched around his eyes, a certain hollowness to his features. You're looking well? He finally offered, the politeness at odds with their circumstances. The foundation's making quite a name for itself. She accepted this assessment with a nod. And yet, there were rumors he'd taken a consulting position with a smaller firm, though nothing had been announced officially. He shrugged, rotating his glass slowly. Consulting, some private investments, nothing permanent. His gaze sharpened. Are you here to gloat? The question lacked heat, sounding more tired than accusatory. Rebecca considered her answer carefully. No, she decided. I don't think either of us won, James. His eyebrows rose at this assessment. You got everything you wanted, didn't you? The moral high ground. Public vindication. That little foundation of yours. She shook her head, surprising herself with the realization that formed as she spoke. What I wanted was to be right. To win. To force you and the board to acknowledge what you'd done. She took a breath, gathering thoughts that had been crystallizing for months. But that wasn't what I needed. I needed to find something worth fighting for beyond my own ego. Beyond being right. His expression shifted, genuine curiosity replacing defensive posture. And did you find what you needed? She thought of Jack's steady hands repairing what others discarded, Sophie's drawings covering their refrigerator, Sarah's strategic mind now directed toward lasting change rather than quarterly profits. Yes, she said simply. I did. James studied her face, perhaps searching for smugness or deception. Finding neither, he seemed to deflate slightly. Well, good for you. The words might have been sarcastic, but his tone suggested reluctant sincerity. After another moment of silence, he added, for what it's worth, I believed in what we were building. The company, I mean. I just lost perspective somewhere. It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as she was likely to get from him. Rebecca nodded, accepting it for what it was, not apology but acknowledgement. We all did, she said. That's what the system rewards. They spoke for a few minutes, more stilted conversation about former colleagues and industry developments before Rebecca rose to leave. As she turned away, James called after her. Rebecca. She paused, looking back. He seemed to struggle with words, finally settling on be careful. The foundation, it's making powerful enemies. People don't like having their methods examined too closely. She accepted this warning with a slight nod. I know, but some things are worth the risk. Walking away, she felt no triumph, no vindication, just a quiet certainty that she was on the right path, regardless of who might wish to obstruct it. That evening, she recounted the encounter to Jack as they sat on the brownstone's small back porch, watching Sophie tend to her fledgling garden with excessive enthusiasm and minimal expertise. Jack listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. Think he was threatening you? The question was calm, practical, rather than alarmist. Rebecca considered this possibility. Not directly, she decided, but reminding me there are consequences to what we're doing. Power structures protect themselves. Jack's hand found hers in the gathering dusk. Good thing you're not alone then. The simple affirmation warmed her more than elaborate promises of protection might have. She wasn't alone, not in this mission, not in this life they were building together. Sophie approached, proudly displaying a handful of cherry tomatoes she'd harvested from plants Ellen had helped her establish. Look, I grew food. Her accomplishment was stated with the gravity of someone who had discovered a fundamental truth about existence. Rebecca and Jack admired the tiny fruits appropriately, their smallness and imperfection only enhancing their value. Sophie insisted they eat them immediately, dividing her treasure equally among the three of them. The flavor burst in Rebecca's mouth, sweeter and more intense than any store-bought equivalent. This she thought was the difference between her old life and new. Not just the scale or appearance of things, but their essential nature. The tomatoes Sophie grew might be smaller, less uniform, than those delivered to her former penthouse by personal shoppers, but they carried something no amount of money could purchase: the satisfaction of cultivation, the triumph of creation, the love embedded in the offering. August brought a breakthrough for the foundation. A major tech corporation facing multiple harassment allegations approached them for guidance in restructuring their reporting systems and accountability measures. The company's CEO had been following the foundation's work and recognized an opportunity to address their issues proactively rather than reactively. It represented exactly the kind of systemic change Rebecca had hoped to facilitate: reform driven by institutional self-interest, aligning with ethical practice. Angela Chen negotiated the consulting agreement carefully, ensuring the foundation maintained independence while providing meaningful guidance. "We're not in the business of corporate absolution," she reminded the company's legal team. "We're here to create lasting change in how power operates within your organization." To her surprise, the CEO agreed to these terms without resistance, even accepting the requirement for quarterly public reporting on their progress. This success attracted attention from other companies facing similar issues, creating momentum beyond individual whistleblower cases. Sarah developed a scalable framework for corporate reform that could be customized to different organizational structures, while Rebecca focused on building relationships with regulatory agencies to ensure government oversight complemented private sector initiatives. The work was demanding, often frustrating, but deeply satisfying in ways corporate leadership had never been. Instead of quarterly earnings driving decisions, human impact became the primary metric measurable in restored careers, improved workplace conditions, and institutional commitments to ethical practice. Rebecca found herself working as hard as she ever had at Morgan Innovations, but the exhaustion carried purpose rather than emptiness. Jack's business expanded to include training programs for young people interested in repair trades. "There's an entire generation that never learned how to fix things," he explained to Rebecca as he developed the curriculum. "They've been taught to replace, not repair. I want to change that." His passion for this work matched her own for the foundation, creating a household where purpose and profession aligned rather than competed. In late August, Ellen announced her intention to sell the farmhouse. "I'm rattling around in that big place," she told them during a Sunday dinner at the Brownstone, "and I miss having you all nearby." Sophie immediately suggested Ellen move in with them, an idea the adults gently modified to finding her an apartment in their neighborhood instead. The farmhouse had been emergency shelter, temporary sanctuary, but it had served its purpose. Like Rebecca's corporate identity, it represented a necessary phase now complete. Ellen seemed to share this perspective, viewing the sale not as loss but as evolution. "A young family's making an offer," she informed them. "Two kids and another on the way. They want to grow, things raise animals. Good people." The farmhouse would continue nurturing new beginnings as it had for them. September brought Sophie's 7th birthday, celebrated with a garden party in their small backyard. Jack built planter boxes as gifts, while Rebecca arranged for a master gardener to visit monthly throughout fall and winter, teaching Sophie about seasonal growing cycles. Ellen baked a cake shaped like a garden plot, complete with cookie vegetables and chocolate soil. Sarah arrived with a child-sized tool set for plant maintenance, prompting squeals of delight from the birthday girl. As Rebecca watched Sophie demonstrate her gardening knowledge to school friends, explaining the difference between annuals and perennials, with authoritative hand gestures, she felt a sense of rightness settle deep in her bones. This child was thriving, not despite the upheaval of the past year, but partly because of it. She had witnessed adults standing for principles, facing challenges, building community. These lessons would shape her far more profoundly than material advantages might have. Later that evening, after guests had departed and Sophie had finally surrendered to sleep amid her new treasures, Jack found Rebecca in the kitchen, mindlessly arranging leftover food into containers. His arms encircled her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy?" The question was simple but profound, encompassing all they'd built together, from that rainy night in an alley to this moment of domestic peace. Rebecca leaned back into his embrace, considering her answer with the honesty that had become their foundation. Not always, she admitted. Some days are hard. The foundation faces resistance. Old doubts surface. She turned in his arms to face him. But yes, deeply happy in ways I never knew were possible. Because even the hard days have meaning now. Purpose beyond performance. His eyes held hers in the soft kitchen, light searching for truth and finding it. Then he reached into his pocket, withdrawing something small that caught the light. A ring. Nothing elaborate or ostentatious, just a simple band with a pattern like branches or roots etched into the metal. I've been carrying this around for weeks, he confessed, waiting for the right moment. Sophie helped me pick it out, said it looked like our garden growing. Rebecca's breath caught as he continued. We don't need paperwork or ceremonies to be a family. We already are. But if you want to make it official in whatever way makes sense to you, the question remained unspoken but clear between them. She took the ring, examining its intricate pattern, not precious stones displaying wealth, but craftsmanship celebrating growth. It was perfect in ways her former self would never have recognized. Yes, she said simply, to making it official, to building roots together. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the metal warm from being carried close to his heart. It settled there as if it had always belonged, much like Rebecca herself had found her place in this life, so different from what she'd planned, yet so much richer than she'd imagined possible. October brought both challenge and opportunity. A major financial publication ran an investigative series on corporate accountability, featuring the Sophie Foundation prominently. The exposure generated significant donations, but also intensified scrutiny from companies threatened by their work. Legal challenges emerged, attempting to undermine the foundation's whistleblower protections through procedural objections and jurisdictional questions. Angela Chen handled these challenges with characteristic effectiveness, while Eleanor Watts leveraged her industry connections to ensure the foundation maintained access to corporate decision-makers despite increasing resistance. What you're experiencing, Eleanor explained during a strategy session, is the system's immune response. You've been identified as a foreign entity. Now you need to convince it you're actually medicine, not disease. This framing helped Rebecca adjust her approach, focusing less on exposing wrongdoing and more on demonstrating the competitive advantages of ethical practice. Companies that implemented the foundation's accountability frameworks showed improved retention, innovation metrics, and reduced legal exposure, quantifiable benefits that appealed to board members and shareholders beyond moral considerations. By mid-October, as the anniversary of her flight from James approached, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the distance traveled not just physically from that rainy alley to this brownstone with its small garden, but emotionally from isolation to connection, from performance to authenticity. The woman who had run barefoot into the rain, clutching incriminating files like talismans, seemed simultaneously herself and a stranger. She shared this observation with Jack one evening as they sat in the garden watching the season's last butterflies visit Sophie's zinnias. He considered her words with characteristic thoughtfulness. You haven't changed as much as you think, he finally said. Her surprise must have shown because he elaborated. That woman had the courage to say no when it would have been easier to comply, to risk everything for what she knew was right. That's still you. You've just found better things to fight for. His assessment resonated with something deep in Rebecca's understanding of herself. She hadn't abandoned ambition or determination, just redirected these qualities toward purposes worthy of their power. The skills that had made her an effective CEO now served community rather than corporation, connection rather than control. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Sophie emerged from the back door, pajama-clad and triumphant. I found it, she'd announced, brandishing a crumpled paper. The drawing she'd made that first morning in Jack's apartment, 3 figures with the woman's outline, initially left empty, then filled with purple. Rebecca had framed it, but it had been temporarily misplaced during unpacking. Sophie handed it to them with ceremonious care. We should hang it in the garden, she declared. So the flowers know who takes care of them. The suggestion brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. This child, who had once left space in her drawing for someone who belonged, had created belonging not just through crayons, but through unconditional acceptance, through the simple recognition of another's essential worth. I think that's a wonderful idea, Rebecca managed. voice thick with emotion. Jack suggested they could weatherproof the drawing in a special frame, preserving it against rain and time. Sophie approved this modification before allowing herself to be shepherded back inside for bedtime, extracting promises that the installation would happen the very next day. Alone again in the twilight garden, Rebecca studied the drawing, crude lines conveying profound truth. Family wasn't what you were born into, but what you built together choice by choice, day by day. The foundation that mattered most wasn't the one bearing Sophie's name, but the one created through trust, through seeing, and being seen through, standing together amid life's uncertainties. Jack's arms settled around her shoulders, solid and warm against the autumn chill. Ready to go in. She nodded but lingered a moment longer, taking in their small plot with its fading summer blooms and new fall plantings. So different from the manicured perfection of corporate landscapes, yet infinitely more valuable in its authentic imperfection. This garden, like their life together, wasn't about flawless appearance, but about continuous cultivation, pulling weeds that threatened to choke growth, providing nourishment for fragile new shoots, celebrating the beauty that emerged not despite challenges, but because of how they were met. Rebecca rose from the garden bench, hand-finding Jack's with practiced ease. Yes, she said, let's go home. Inside, the brownstone glowed with warm light against the gathering darkness. Not a showcase of wealth or status, but a true home, lived in, somewhat messy, filled with evidence of shared existence. Crayon masterpieces on the refrigerator, books stacked by favorite reading spots, a calendar crowded with foundation events, repair business appointments and school activities. The beautiful complexity of lives intertwined through choice rather than circumstance. As Rebecca closed the garden door behind them, securing it against the night she carried with her, the certainty that had emerged from months of upheaval and rebuilding. She hadn't just walked away from power. She had walked towards something infinitely more valuable, a life where love wasn't transaction but transformation, where success wasn't measured in acquisitions, but in connections, where home wasn't a location, but the people who saw you completely and chose you anyway, day after imperfect, glorious day.